On today's show, the Hawks and Jalen Johnson agreed to a 5-year extension. On Monday, we'll break down all of what goes into that extension, how good it is for the Hawks, and spoiler alert, it's very good for the Hawks, in my opinion, and all of the fallout in the future, and we'll get into all of that and more coming up.
You are Locked On Hawks, your daily Atlanta Hawks podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
Hello, friends. Welcome to episode 1826 of the Locked On Hawks podcast. I am your host, Brad Rowland, coming to you on a Monday evening into Tuesday here in mid to late October. And today's podcast is sponsored by the folks at Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use promo code LOCKEDONNBA for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. I also want to tell you at the top of the podcast, as I always do, to make sure first listen each and every day here at Locked On Hawks. Check us out and subscribe to the podcast anywhere you happen to find your podcasts. We're on Apple, we're on Spotify, we're on Amazon Music, we're on Overcast, and we're also on YouTube. If you're watching this podcast right now, please like the episode and subscribe on that platform. And one more announcement at the top of the podcast. This show now has a newsletter. Introducing the Locked On Hawks daily newsletter. It's one stop for the ultimate team and league coverage delivered right to your inbox. Sign up for free along with the entire podcast network at Locked On at LockedOnDaily.com. And here we are. A somewhat emergency podcast. I was planning to do a show either way on Monday because it was a deadline, and deadlines happen to spur action most of the time in the NBA world. But it was going to be a will they or won't they with Jalen Johnson and the Hawks. And in the end, they did make the deal for Jalen Johnson. So as we'll spend most of this episode on, Jalen Johnson agreed on Monday to a 5-year, $150 million deal with the Hawks. It's a rookie scale extension. It does not begin until next year, as all of these do. This coming season, the one that's about to start on Wednesday, he's still playing on his first contract. But after that, it becomes a 5-year lockdown of Jalen Johnson. And now he's under contract through 2030. That's a long time, but that's where he'll be under contract. It is a 5-year deal, no options on either side, no team options, no player options. And also, my guy, Mike Scotto, had this first, barely before I could get it confirmed. But it's a flat $30 million per season. No increases, no decreases. It's just $30 million a year. It's actually fairly surprising, honestly. You usually see an increase to kind of mirror where the cap is going, and the cap is usually rising unless it's been a pandemic, basically. But Jalen will start at $30 million. It'll be $30 million every year until the deal is over. And that, as we're going to later on in the podcast, means that his salary cap hit at the end of the contract will be very, very low compared to where the cap is supposed to be at that point in time. And now, after the reporting wave is over, the Hawks announced the extension. The Hawks never announce, quote unquote, the details of extensions. They just say that a deal has been done. Their team policy is not actually give the numbers, but I can confirm again, 5 years, $150, $30 million a year. But Landry Fields included a quote saying the following: Jalen Johnson embodies the characteristics that we look for as an organization, both on and off the court. He has shown continuous improvement each year and has the character and the work ethic to continue to grow his game. He's developed into a significant part of our team, and we're thrilled to continue his development in Atlanta, end quote. So a lot to get on here. Obviously, we'll get 30 minutes worth of content probably about this extension and more in the future, I would say. But at the same time, the way that I would put it is that one thing matters most to the listeners, Hawks fans, and that is that this is a great deal for the Hawks. And that is what I believe. So there are ways as sort of breaking that down and talking about why that is, but that is the top line thought for me. I've been saying on the show basically all summer long, on this show and other appearances even that I've been doing guest spots on or whatever, that I thought, and this was an informed thought in some respects, that if a deal got done, the average value of the contract on a yearly basis would start with a 3. Is the way that I kind of been saying that in a cheeky fashion, meaning $30 million or more per season. And I wasn't just saying that. It was not a coincidence. I'd heard throughout the process that was kind of the minimum that he might accept on his side. By the way, it's not just he. It's always the player and the agent and the reps, all that stuff. But that was the number that I thought was kind of the basement for what Jalen might take in an extension. And, of course, he got exactly a number that begins with a 3 and exactly that number in each and every season. So that was not a coincidence. Again, I'm not always right about things, but that's kind of something I heard and ended up being persisting throughout the process. But my stance, generally speaking, when evaluating the team side of a rookie scale extension, which again is a year ahead of time, is that I think the team should get a bargain. Always think that they're getting a bargain in order to actually give out the deal, because it doesn't begin for another year and they actually have restricted free agency at their disposal. One weapon the team has is to say, look, no extension means that you're still going to be a guy we have under control beyond this year. The Hawks could have taken this to next year. And yeah, Jalen probably would have gotten more. We'll talk about more in a second. But they could have matched the offer on him. the team has a pretty heavy hand if they want to take that way. And I think a lot of teams often don't play that hand hard enough. This time around, though, the Hawks did get a bargain, I think. This checks that box. They got a deal that I think is a bargain if things go reasonably well for both sides. One way that I would frame this also is that I think Jalen could basically be the player that he was last season, which was age 21 and 22 for Jalen. He turned 22 in the middle of the season. Last year was his first season as a full-time starter in the NBA. And if he's just that player moving forward, he was a good player, but just that player moving forward, this deal is still totally fine. And that's a really encouraging thought because Jalen Johnson, I think even people that are not all on the bandwagon of Jalen Johnson would tell you that given where his age is and his talent, he probably is going to get better. He doesn't project to get worse in the short term. Maybe when he's 32, he'll get worse, whatever it's going to be. But it's a safe bet, I think, to say that he won't be getting worse than he was as a breakout player last year on the whole. And if he's just that player, this is still, in my mind, a pretty favorable contract for the Hawks. Of course, if he gets better, then it goes from like a double or a triple to an absolute home run grand slam, depending on how good he might be in the future. I'll dive into the numbers a little bit more later. Where the cap is right now, $30 million in the current landscape, and especially in the future landscape, is not a lot of money. I mean, it is a lot of money, but it isn't a lot of money. Like, for instance, we'll get into more later on. Even in year one of this deal, that they actually started a little bit higher than they had to, $30 million in year one, it's still less than 20% of the cap. He could have signed 25% of the cap in an extension and didn't get that much, but even year one is 19% of the cap, basically. And it's very, very friendly, I would say, throughout that. And I think by the end of this contract, he'll be making money that you could assign to like a fifth starter or lower, basically. So obviously the Hawks believe, and so do I, for the record, that Jalen is likely to improve from this point forward. He has real upside. I think he has star upside. Now, does that mean he's going to get there? We'll see. But as far as like a pathway to that, I think it's pretty obviously that he has that. So there's always sticker shock on these deals. I get that. Fans have not necessarily adjusted yet to the numbers and the money and how big the money is. And it's a lot of money. I promise you I understand that. But $30 million a year isn't max money anymore. When I first started covering the league, $30 million a year was like a ridiculous amount of money. And now in NBA terms, again, NBA terms, is not close to the max. For example, Jalen could have signed a deal today, 5 years and $224 million. That was his max. So he got $74 million less than he could have gotten. That's $15 million or so per season less than the max. Now, I'm not telling him that he should have gotten the max, because if I was the Hawks, I would not have offered him the max. But he's not much worse than some guys who got the max. I won't name a ton of names, but Franz Wagner is one. Like, I think Franz, you could say he's better, but he's not $15 million a year better than Jalen Johnson, for example. And again, there's a decent chance that in the future, and maybe as soon as this season even, he could be a max level player. Maybe not a 40% max level player, but like maybe not like a Jokic level player, but a 25% max level player, certainly within the realm of possibility for Jalen Johnson, and he's making a lot less than that. And as far as what the true value could have been or should have been for Jalen in a neutral market if he was a free agent right now, I think the Hawks, and if it was me, if he's a free agent, and by the way, he wasn't, was he worth 35, 37, 40 million a year? Sure, you could argue that on all levels. I think, again, his current play, 35 million a year, probably something like that. If you bake in an increase and an improvement from him, which I think is going to happen, he'd be worth more than that in the market. But again, that would have been an overpay maybe if he didn't improve. But if he had gotten, let's say, 5 years and 180 million or 5 years and 190 million, that would have been a deal that I would not have come on and like got the pom-poms out for. But I would have said, hey, that's pretty reasonable. There are comparisons in this range. And by the way, he still could have outperformed that deal. Would I have been in a hurry to get that deal out if I was the Hawks at 5 for 190 a year ahead of time? Maybe not. But I wouldn't have criticized it. I think it would have been like somewhat reasonable given where his given where his talent actually is. But at 5 and 150, I think it's an absolute no-brainer for the Hawks, basically. So I'll leave that there, and we'll come back to it. On the player side, I do think that it's likely that Jalen would have gotten more than this next summer if he had pushed it. Now, not definite, but likely. There's always risk, and it's a transfer of risk. So right now, today, as they're negotiating, the risk is on the player side because Jalen, I'm sure, had a standing offer from the Hawks of whatever it was, 9-figure contract. We'll say that, just 9-figure contract. The risk at that point is on the player. If he says no to that, he's taking on a risk that something will happen. He will not play well or whatever, and he'll leave some of that money on the table. That's his risk. The minute that the deal is accepted, the risk goes on the team. So if you're the team side, you want a bargain on that because you're taking on the risk now. If you're the player, part of the reason why you might sign a contract a year early that's maybe a little bit less than you might be worth, quote unquote, or that you might get in the future is that you are now giving away all the risk and locking in a ton of security. And look, I just gave you all the numbers, and we'll talk about this more later on in a basketball sense. But I think you would have gotten more next summer if I had to guess. But it is so much money in real world terms that you have to consider taking it. It is what it is. $150 million in guaranteed money, no options, guaranteed money is a massive, life-changing amount of money, even for a professional athlete. So first and foremost, congrats to Jalen on that. That's awesome. I like Jalen. We're not like friends, but I've talked to him. He seems like a really good guy. All that said, it's a great thing for him and his family. In his first 4 seasons, Jalen, before taxes, made about $12.8, $12.9 million total in 4 years. Now, that's more than I'll make in my life. I'll acknowledge that. It's a lot of money. But in NBA terms, that isn't a lot of money. Taxes, all those things, like you're taking home a lot of money. I get that. But like you have not made, never worry about money again, money in some respects. But to parse all that, it's a lot of money. I get it. But when you can go from making less than $13 million in your life to more than $160 million in your life guaranteed by signing one document, one contract, it's pretty obvious why you might want to do that. So yeah, could he have gotten $200 million next summer? Could he have gotten the max next summer? Very possible. Sure. But the gap in my mind, quality of life wise, I'm just a guy, but between banking $15 million in your career or 160 guaranteed is a lot bigger than it is from 160 to 210 or whatever you want to say it is. So on the player side, yes, in cruel black and white terms, could he have gotten more? Maybe. I would say probably. But man, it's a lot of money, and I can't blame him for that. So my overall view, before we move on to the rest of the podcast, is that this is a win-win. Not always deals are win-wins. There have been extensions that I've covered on the Hawks that I thought were win-wins. I thought the Okongwu deal last summer was a win-win for the Hawks. It wasn't a grand slam deal, but it was a good value in my opinion, and it made sense for Okongwu. He got to bank $60 million, whatever it was, and made sense. The Kevin Huerter deal, same thing a few years ago. Good value for the Hawks, I thought, at that point in time. The DeAndre Hunter deal, even at the time, I thought was not a great deal from the Hawks. I didn't know why they did that. A year actually looks a little bit worse now, I would say. But even then, I was kind of like, it's not awful, but I wouldn't have done that. But on the player side, it made sense. This is one where, yes, I think the team won, quote unquote, the negotiation here from a pure basketball standpoint. So that's a win for the Hawks and their fans. It's a good deal for them. But Young gets the huge bag. He doesn't have to worry about this at all this season. He'll talk tomorrow, I'm sure, to the media. He'll be excited, I'm sure, without this. And then after that, it goes away for 4 years, probably, about his contract. So he'll be a free agent again, by the way. If he does break out and become a star, number one, the Hawks will love that. Number two, if he does that, he'll become a free agent again at the age of 28. And he can make even more money. So there's more to get on his front. So that's the first segment of the podcast. Great deal for the Hawks. And I mean that. Like, yes, is there a way that this deal could go badly? Sure. There's always risk. And I will not tell you that there's not, because there always is. Even on max deals, there's always risk. It is what it is. You can't eliminate that. But the Hawks got a bargain. They got a player that has real upside to outperform this deal. And on the Jalen side, it's a life-changing amount of money. So I can't imagine really being too upset on any side here. And we'll leave it there for now and come back to more detail in a second. But first, though, more to come on the podcast. I promise you, we will have the cap details. We'll have a little bit more news. Kobe Bufkin, unfortunately, has an injury that we'll touch on. Some comparisons to Jalen's contract to kind of give you more of a reference point about what this money is going to be going to, et cetera, et cetera. All that's coming up. But first, though, a word from our partners on the show. Today's show is brought to you by FanDuel Sportsbook, and the season is now here in a big way. You can begin the season with a big return as well at FanDuel Sportsbook. FanDuel is America's #1 sportsbook, and you can check out a ton of information sets from latest stats to live play-by-play and so much more all on the same page where you're placing your bets at FanDuel Sportsbook. You also begin with a big offer at FanDuel. That's $200 in bonus bets guaranteed when you place your first $5 bet at FanDuel. You should also know that FanDuel Sportsbook is really easy to use in the app in particular. And everything that you actually want or looking for in the sports betting space, from over-unders to point spreads to money lines to player props. They have live betting, same-game parlays, future bets, and so much more. The app is safe. It's secure. They cover the entire range of sports as well. NBA, of course, is first and foremost on this podcast. That's there at FanDuel as well. WNBA, NFL, college football, MLB, hockey, golf, tennis, soccer, auto racing, boxing, MMA, and so many more sports for you. And now is an awesome time to sign up with the folks at FanDuel Sportsbook, and the place to go is FanDuel.com to get started. And when you get there, you get $200 in bonus bets guaranteed when you place your first $5 bet. One more time, just visit FanDuel.com and check out America's #1 sportsbook. All right, and I want to give some comparison to fans about what Jalen's going to be getting when it comes to that 5 for 150 framework in the current landscape. I gave a little bit of that context earlier, but the max he could have got was, again, 5 years and $224. That wasn't going to happen a year in advance, which I have been saying all summer long, but he could have gotten that. But with this information out there from Mike Scotto, and I've confirmed, is that's $30 million a year, exactly, flat across the board. That means in year one, he'll be getting about 19.4% of the salary cap. Now, that's a decent amount, of course, but not the max. But then, with every waking year after that, the deal gets better and better from a team standpoint. In year two, it's 17.6% of the cap. In year three, it's 16% of the cap. In year four, it's 14.6% of the cap. And then in year five of the guaranteed 5-year deal for the Hawks, it is 13.3% of the cap. So for some comparison stuff here. At the moment, Clint Capella and DeAndre Hunter are both between 15 and 16% of the cap. So from basically the last 3 years of this deal, Jalen will be making roughly what Capella and Hunter are making this year. There you go. A good comparison point. Trey Young this year is making 30.6% of the cap. And by the way, he's worth that. But by the end of this deal, Jalen will be making less than half of what Trey's making this year on a cap percentage basis, which is all that matters from a basketball standpoint. In real life terms, sure, the money all counts. But when it's a salary cap, it basically just treat this. If you're a fan, it's monopoly money. Just it's all about percentage of the cap. One more reference point here. Using current cap projections, which is all those things they're changeable. They could change in the future, but they're what the NBA issues is guidance, basically. The last 2 years of the extension, Jalen will be below what Hunter's making right now. And yeah, Hunter's not in a great contract, but that is what we're talking about here. When you're making 13% of the cap in year 5 of a deal where it is possible Jalen Johnson is a star at that point, it is probable, in my opinion, that he's at least like a top 50, 60 player in the league, making 13% of the cap. Like Bogey this year on a objectively great contract, in my opinion, is making 12.3% of the cap. So kind of roughly what Jalen will be making in year 5 of that deal at age 28, smack dab in the middle of his prime. So that's why you're taking the risk for the Hawks, is because the reward potentially on that, if he is a star level player at that point, is absolutely massive. Okay, so that's one point here. There are some guys in his general range. So coming into Sunday, only 4 guys in this entire draft class of 2021 had signed an extension, and they were all max extensions. Nobody else had signed an extension until now. People were asking me today, why they wait so long? The league just kind of tends to do this. I said it all summer long, but once you get back like the first couple days in July, after that, you might get 1 or 2, but the rest of them happen to just go all the way to the wire. For whatever reason, deadline spur action, it is what it is. I don't know if that's the right thing to do, but it is what it is. So other guys in his range today. Trey Murphy signed for 4 years and $116 million with the Pelicans. That is about, a little bit, it's like $29 million a year. It is what it is. Like, it's very similar to where Jalen is. I think Trey Murphy is really good. That's a team-friendly deal for the Pelicans. And if both players stay the same of what they are right now, I think Jalen and Trey Murphy are pretty similar right now as far as overall value, not like their games, but just overall value. I do think, though, Jalen has so much more upside than Trey Murphy that you can kind of see the difference there. That's kind of the way I'd frame it. If it was just like stop the clock today, who's better? If you want to tell me Trey Murphy is as good as Jalen Johnson right now today, I won't scream at you. But in 2 years, 3 years, Jalen's upside is a lot higher than Trey Murphy's. So I think the Trey Murphy deal was a good one for the Pelicans, like for the team side. And Jalen got an extra year of control for the Hawks and the same AAV basically. So that's a good data point in the Hawks' favor. Jalen Suggs got the same exact contract as Jalen Johnson, 5 for 150. Jalen Suggs was really good last year, all defensive player, different archetype. and all that, I think same kind of principle applies. If you think Suggs is better than Johnson right now, I'd listen to that. I think Johnson's upside is very obviously higher. Jalen Green got a very strange deal, 3 for 106 with a player option. The first guy I think ever in this range to sign for a 2+1. I actually think Jalen Johnson's better than Jalen Green right now. That might be an outlier opinion. I'm not high on Jalen Green, but still, he got a lot. He got more in average value, but a shorter deal, player option, strange. And then Alperen Sengun got a lot more, 5 for 185 and a player option. Now Sengun is different, but I think the gap between Johnson and Sengun is not as big as those numbers probably indicate. So again, more data points that are positive for Atlanta. Last year, there were 3 deals in this kind of rough range. The closest to what the Hawks got from Johnson was Devin Vassell in San Antonio. Vassell got 5 for 135 from the Spurs, which is less money, but in a lower cap environment. If you do the same translation now, using the cap environment in the future, it'd be about 5 for 148. So almost exactly the same deal. I think, one more time here, I think Jalen Johnson is better than Devin Vassell now and has more upside and is younger. So another good data point for the Hawks. Desmond Bane is a different player and, by the way, a better player than Jalen, but is 2 or 3 years older than Jalen. He got 5 and 197 last year. And this kind of environment, it would be 5 and 216 for Desmond Bane. Again, Bane is better than Jalen, but I think that gap should not be $65 million over 5 years. Bane is not $13 million a year better than Jalen Johnson. So all of those things go towards the Hawks getting a good deal here. And one deal that I'll mention that's not a rookie extension, but it was a restricted free agency deal, is Emmanuel Quickley. He got 5 for 175. And there's some lower incentives on that, so it's like more like 5 for 163. But Jalen, I think, is better than Quickley right now. Younger, higher upside, and got less. So all those data points are positive. And I'm sure that Jalen's camp was probably using some of those as anchors in a positive direction for their negotiations. But in the end, the Hawks kind of won that one. And quickly, the previous year, there were 3 deals between $26 million and $31 million average annual value. Jordan Poole, Tyler Hero, and RJ Barrett. That was a different league at that point in time, but those are all deals that would be well over what Jalen got in average value. And again, one more time, Jalen's better than all those guys, even now. And it's been 2 years later. Those guys theoretically should have improved. He's better than them right now. And they're all 2 years older and making a lot more on a percentage of the cap basis. So long story short, everybody, a deal that I really like. Always risk, but a deal I really like. I'll have more in a second on this, but I want to at least touch on this briefly, and then we'll come back to it. From a cap standpoint, one question I got today was, kind of before the deal came down, was like, the Hawks couldn't just wait and maybe open up some cap space next year by not paying Jalen. That was a potential avenue, is what I would say. But I always thought, and I said this before the deal came down, that if the Hawks could find a deal for Jalen, they should. And if they wanted to. If they had not found a deal, then you kind of look up and say, all right, there's a chance that we might be able to kind of wiggle a little bit of room here because Jalen has a low cap hold, kind of what the Sixers did with Maxey this last summer. But it was harder because DeAndre Hunter's on the roster, and to make any meaningful cap space, they'd have to either shed Hunter or shed Bogey or shed Okongwu or whatever. And also, this free agent class next summer is not the best. So I'm not saying that was impossible. That was a potential avenue, but I got questions even after the deal, like, why did the Hawks do this now? The reason why they did it now is because they got a great deal, in my opinion. But also, yes, they could have had cap space, but the Hawks are not exactly a free agent destination historically, and there wasn't like a perfect avenue for that to happen. So, like, yes, it was possible, but even if they had given him more than this, I would have said do this versus trying to have that pie in the sky, very narrow pathway to cap space. Now the cap space options off the table probably, unless they do a lot of clearing, and they do have some decisions to make, and we'll talk about that in a second when it comes to the salary cap stuff. But I just want to answer that one because it was kind of a prevalent question as to why they maybe could have waited. And yes, he would have had a small cap hold, but in the end, if you can get him locked down for 5 years and one more time making 13.3% of the cap in year 5, you have to do it. And I'll leave it there. Okay, more to come on the rest of the podcast, including a little bit of a update that I don't want to give about Kobe Bufkin, and also some more deadlines to look at in the next couple of days and weeks. First, though, word from our partners on the show. Today's show is sponsored by BetterHelp. What's something that happens to scare you? For me, I'm really afraid of heights. I will admit that openly. I've been that way for a very long time. And therapy, though, is a great tool to face your fears and actually find ways to overcome those fears. Sometimes the scariest thing is not facing the fears in the first place, but holding ourselves back as a result of that. And therapy can be helpful for everyone. And that is why I check out the folks at BetterHelp. You can learn positive coping skills, how to set better boundaries, and also be empowered to be the best version of yourself. I have my own stresses and fears that I deal with all the time. And we can all benefit from getting things off of our chest sometimes. If you think about starting therapy, give BetterHelp a try right now. It's entirely online. It's designed to be flexible and convenient to your schedule, which is huge for people like me who are navigating time crunches all the time. BetterHelp is great for that. And all you have to do is fill out a brief questionnaire to get matched with a licensed therapist, and you can switch therapists anytime for no additional charge. Take off the mask with the folks at BetterHelp. Visit BetterHelp.com/LockedOnNBA to get 10% off your first month with BetterHelp. One more time, the place to go is BetterHelp. That's better. That's BetterHelp. BetterHelp.com/LockedOnNBA. One more time, it's BetterHelp.com/LockedOnNBA. All right, so I won't do the entire 20-minute version of this, but the cap impact of Jalen. The Hawks now have 7 guys on guaranteed deals for next season. It's Trey, it's Ricochet, it's Bogey, it's Okongwu, it's Hunter, it's Mogay on a small deal, and now Jalen. 7 guys on guaranteed deals. Then you have Dyson Daniels on a team option that it's almost, I would say not even almost, it's a lot to be picked up. That's 8. Kobe Bufkin's team option is likely to be picked up. That's 9. And Vit Krejci is non-guaranteed, but it's so cheap and he's a good player, so I'm guessing that will be picked up. That's 10. 10 guys under contract that I project next year for the Hawks. And with that, they are already over the cap. Not the tax, but the cap. So they have the MLE or whatever they want to use that, but they're already over the cap after doing this deal. They're about $22 million under the projected tax line when you include Jalen's $30 million. So one of these small pain points in doing the deal flat like they did with Jalen is that it's a little bit higher in year 1. And that means if the Hawks want to still do this dance where they don't want to pay the tax, it'll be a little bit harder to do in year 1. But that's kind of what you have to be willing to do. And by the way, that 10-man group I just named for you includes 1 center, and it's Okongwu. That's no Capella and no Nance because they'll be free agents. Now, they're not irreplaceable, but the Hawks will have to have more centers. So they have to add to that roster. There's machinations to look at in the future. There's work to do. And again, the Hawks have a documented history of luxury tax evasion, basically. So we'll see if they actually do that. But Jalen does make a little bit more in year 1 than I would have probably guessed he would make because of the way they structure the deal. But the benefit of that is at the end versus the beginning. At the end, it's going to be a heist, almost certainly. All right, last thing. That was the last thing on this. One more time quickly. Great deal for the Hawks. Good deal for Jalen. I won't say great, but good. Obviously, life-changing money kind of deal for Jalen. And then the impact will be met more in the future than the present. But really an upbeat day. I'm sure that everyone was doing a lot of celebrating today. Jalen will probably speak on Tuesday. I will relay some of that if there's any audio from that I can pass along to you on our next show. But yeah, a fun one. And I think generally a thing to celebrate if you're a Hawks fan. And look, I've said this all summer long, but Jalen isn't their best player, but Jalen is the guy that they are most committed to as far as their discussions. Maybe you could say Ricochet now as number 1 overall pick. Obviously, they're committed to Trey right now, but Jalen is the guy that was untouchable in trade this summer. They are all in on Jalen. They already were. And I was prepared to come on the podcast, and I would have meant this, that even if they did not do a deal today, that would not have changed the opinion of the Hawks on Jalen Johnson. They love Jalen Johnson. Not just they love Jalen Johnson. They are married to him. They are all in on Jalen Johnson. And that was going to be the case whether they did a deal or not. But because they got a deal done at a good number, everyone could be really excited about this. And they certainly are. All right, one more thing to touch on, and then we'll kind of sign off quickly here. Kobe Bufkin hurt his shoulder at practice on Saturday. The Hawks were off on Sunday, so we didn't really know about this until today. But he did not practice today. And then the Hawks kind of announced that he has a shoulder injury, but did not give any kind of detail on what the injury is. Now, crucially, he is out already for Wednesday, which is the one thing they actually did say. But no timeline or listing of official designation. This is the same shoulder that cost him Summer League. So Kobe got hurt in training camp for Summer League in July. It was a subluxation of that shoulder at that point in time. He went to Vegas. He was around the team, but he didn't play for a few weeks. Missed Summer League, etc. This is his first repeat injury. And a lot of people, and I don't blame you, were saying, man, he's hurt again. And I get it. he's had some injuries, no question about that, in his first year plus. Last year, he had a thumb injury that was fluky. Like, it just happens. Trey had one this year. Like, it just happens. Guys gets caught in jerseys or whatever. That stuff happens. But the other one was a big toe issue. But then this is the second injury in the same shoulder. Now, it's this non-shooting shoulder. That's better, but still want to keep an eye on. And again, I wish I had more information for you as I'm recording this podcast on Monday night. We don't know what the actual injury is or how long he'll be out. What we do know, he's out on Wednesday. And I'll talk about this a little bit more on tomorrow's show in advance of the game on Wednesday as the Hawks welcome the Nets to town in Atlanta. But Bufkin was penciled in, not in pen, but penciled in as the backup point guard, meaning that he'd be on the court when Trey was off. Now, the natural question is, what do they do without Bufkin? They already were kind of going to this multiple ball handler discussion. Quinn would not anoint Kobe in that role. But it's going to be some combination, if I had to guess right now, of Vit Krejci and Dyson Daniels and Bogey, if you want to say that. I would say they're going to want two of those three guys, if not all three, on the court when Trey is off. And maybe a little bit of Risa Shea as ball handler, maybe a little bit of Jalen as a ball handler. They have guys that can handle the ball. But as far as the primary point guard, they don't have one besides Trey. Even their third point guard is Keaton Wallace on a two-way, and Keaton is still more of a combo. He's not really a run your offense kind of player. So this is one of the reasons why the Hawks did try this summer to get a more straight-ahead backup point guard. They tried on Tyus Jones. They tried on Colin Gillespie. Like, there were varying degrees of this, but they wanted to have a little more insurance. This is part of the reason why. But I do think that Vit, while he's not a point guard traditionally, is a point guard skilled kind of player. He's a pass-first player, facilitator, etc. Same thing with Dyson. He was a point guard early in his career, especially at lower levels. Not a point guard now, but certainly can handle the ball, can pass the ball. They have enough of that, but they don't have like the every down initiator without Trey. So that'll be a big TBD. And of course, as we know more about Kobe's injury and timeline stuff, I'll pass that along. But obviously, like, I don't want to get overanalyze this right now, but it's not great timing for him. He had a big game in the finale a few days ago. So there was some optimism about Kobe, and hopefully this is not going to keep him out for a long time, but TBD on that. And one more process thing before we sign off. Trey Young was also extension eligible today, which no one really talked about because, like, I thought it was a little bit earlier in the summer. No one on either side, Trey's side or the Hawks side, thought this was going to happen, but I wanted to note it. He, along with a lot of other stars who were eligible, like, just don't have a reason to sign the contract right now. He can get a lot more money next summer. And I do think that it's a potential pivot point next summer that I've discussed several times. If he does not extend next summer, alarm bells will begin to go off. A la Donovan Mitchell, et cetera, et cetera. That he did extend, so it didn't matter. But next summer is the decision on Trey Young, not today. So people were kind of, oh, he didn't sign? Yes, he could have signed, but it would have been a discount extension that he was not going to sign. That was never going to happen. So I wouldn't worry about that much at all. And then one more thing here. There's one more deadline. Because the Hawks did announce their roster for the season today. No surprises. It was still the same roster. Cody Zeller is still on it. He is still not with the team. TBD on all of that still. But they have actually about 9-ish days to decide on rookie scale team options, which happen every year before the season starts. They have until the end of October, basically, to do this. It's Dyson Daniels' fourth-year option, which is an absolute lock. It's $7.7 million. Then Kobe Bufkin's third-year option, about $4.5 million. I expect that to be picked up based on the fact that he's a first-round pick, etc. And then David Roddy, fourth-year option, about $4.8 million. That one is a lot dicier. I would probably guess it won't be picked up, but that's one to keep an eye on in the next 9 days. But it was a big day today in the league. Not only was it extension day, but also roster day. The Hawks did their work over the weekend when they elected to waive Kevon Harris and Daquan Plowden. Those were the non-guarantee guys. No surprises there, but the Hawks now have 15 guys on the roster and 3 two-ways. And yes, Zeller's on the roster. They can still cut him in whenever they want to, if they want to. They can buy him out whenever they want to. But for now, he's on the team, but no, there's no indication he'll actually be with the team at any point, and maybe they'll be using him as a trade candidate or a roster spot, turnover, or whatever. I will report on that if I know more in the future. All right. That's all I have on today's podcast, and I've been saying a lot of words in the last half hour or so, but a big day for the Hawks, a big day for Jalen Johnson, and a day to celebrate, I think, for Hawks fans. So I'll leave you with that. We'll have more coming up on the podcast, so please stay tuned. I'll do one plug. I had Tyler Jones on the podcast for a 2-parter on Sunday evening into Monday. You should listen to that for sure. Always fun talking to Tyler, and that was a good kind of way to prep for the season. On Tuesday, I'm planning to drop 2 episodes, actually. I already recorded one with Robbie Cowland, which is our last installment of the Over-Unders on the Southeast Division. So some Hawks stuff in there, Magic, Heat, Wizards, and Hornets. And then I will do kind of my final check-in / Nets preview episode on Tuesday with some predictions, my final record prediction, rotation thoughts, all that stuff's going to be happening on a Tuesday evening, probably late Tuesday into Wednesday, because the opener, again, is on Wednesday at home. I'll be there. Hawks, Nets. The Nets are not a good basketball team on paper. The Hawks are favored at FanDuel right now by 7.5 points, so we'll have more on that coming up. But it's a busy, busy week. In fact, if you do the math on that, I will have posted 5 episodes this week before the game on Wednesday, which is not usually, that's kind of a barrage. I was gone over the weekend, but that's kind of a one-time only flourish of content. But between the Jalen thing, I wanted to talk to Tyler, all that stuff. I had to blow it out, and we did just that. And we'll have more on Tuesday, and then much more on Wednesday, post-game, et cetera, et cetera. And the Hawks play again on Friday. Full week coverage, and I promise you I'll have you covered across the board. Please subscribe to this podcast on Apple, on Spotify, on Overcast, on Amazon Music, also on YouTube. Please like this episode as you are watching it on YouTube. Please comment if you have things to say on the podcast in reaction to it, or just to help the algorithm, all that stuff. Like the show, subscribe to the show, and tell your friends. If you have a Hawks fan friend in your life that listens to podcasts of any kind, or just wants to have more content on the Hawks and they haven't found this podcast yet, put it in front of them. Text it to them. Share on your social media. Share on Reddit, how you want to do that. Pass it along to someone. I very much appreciate all the support. Follow the show on Twitter /X at Locked On Hawks. Follow me there at BT Rowland. Follow my non-podcast work at patreon.com/BT Rowland. Thanks so much, everybody. I really do appreciate it always, and I promise you I really do. It means a lot to me, and we'll have more coming up later this week, so stay tuned. We'll see you all next time.